Good evening. My name is Anita Enander. I'm going to be your moderator this evening. But first, we'd like to introduce and have Joan Davison, who organized this meeting, kick this off.
Hi, I have been doing this high density housing information or journey for several years, along with many of you. And I thought it would be best if everyone got together, if we could get together the local cities, because all the state laws have tremendous impacts on each and every one of us in a different way. In Palos Verdes, we have small cities, we've been built out. Right now, we have a terrible landslide. I don't know how that's going to affect the numbers we're supposed to bring to the state of California of the regional housing needs numbers of units. We're having a fiasco here, in my opinion. So I'll let the speakers introduce themselves. We've got Redondo, Torrance, Rancho Palos Verdes, Palos Verdes Estates. So we're all here together as local cities in the South Bay, and we want what's best for our cities. And right now, with all the state laws and 32 more passed last week, or signed last week, excuse me, by the governor, it puts us in a very terrible position. Just as one example, Assembly Bill 1893 is reducing the units for mixed income projects from 20% down to 13 for to accommodate low income housing. The purpose of the housing was to accommodate affordable housing, and now they're ripping that away. It's showing to me that we have an unsustainable situation for all of our cities. I don't know what's going to happen in the next year, but I'll let the people who are the current electeds maybe speak to that. And I guess, Nels, you want to speak first? Is that okay? Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm Nils Nernheim, council member here in Redondo Beach since
Did you want to
2017.
watch something? I'm listening to the.
And I was I was elected in 2017, and primarily because of land use issues in Redondo Beach. We stopped a mall the size of 5 Walmarts, including a 700-seat movie theater. Within 10 days of being sworn in, I was sued personally and individually, along with a few co-defendants, 3 other co-defendants. I've been all the way up to the state Supreme Court and back down to the trial court. I've been proven to do nothing wrong. And who sued me over the election, I might add? It was the developer. And I've come to know developers, unfortunately, really well through the legal system, through us here in Redondo Beach fighting the developers. They come to Redondo Beach to overdevelop housing in particularly, but we're along the coastline. Everyone wants housing and development projects along the coastline. And I got reelected in 2021 along with our late mayor Bill Brand, who passed away this last February. And it's been a real long, rough ride dealing with these housing laws, dealing with the developers and people trying to take advantage of our local communities. And while being an elected official, I've been president of Independent Cities Association, ICA. And we really, one of our charter ideas as our organization, it's over 40 plus cities in LA County, is to stay independent from the state, of the county, of each other. We're all solving the same problems, all in our different ways, characters, our own communities. And what's so important about that is our zoning laws, the state overreach is happening more and more every single year. It's only getting worse. It's not getting better. And it's only going to get to a point in time where they're going to take over all of our local zoning. We won't have a choice to do anything other than what the state legislature tells us what to do.
Niels, can you talk specifically about, there's a lawsuit where the power plant is going on, maybe really briefly?
Yep. So real briefly, we have a power plant here at Redondo Beach. It's roughly 50 acres. It's been there for over 100 years. It includes 6 acres of wetlands that shall be restored, using the word "shall" by the Coastal Commission. it was sold to an alleged and supposed developer, new owner in 2019. He's paid $28 million cash. He paid on the dotted line is $55 million. He did not pay a single dollar thereafter, after 2019, after the deposit was made. The Power Plant Corporation, AES, put him into a foreclosure notice November of 2022, and then it was to go to auction on February of 2023, to which he has bankrupted his largest LLC to get out of the foreclosure. And then he five or so months later, in June, he filed a counter complaint against the Power Corporation. And in between that time, we were doing what's called our housing element. It's a really complicated document. It has to be done every single 8 years. And we did it early, went to the state and said, hey, here it is. They came back to us months later, doing a revision, back and forth. Well, we certified our housing element document on July 5th, 2022. And on September 1st, 2022, Housing Community Development, HCD, a state organization, agency, they certified our housing element. Well, in August of 2022, the alleged and supposed owner filed what's called a developer's remedy project. And on that piece of property, it sits right on the water in Redondo, and he is asking for 2,700 residential units plus a commercial space plus hotel, and all in the coastal zone. So the Coastal Commission, he actually owns a parcel right across the street, which he bought for cash, and he did not even get an appraisal on that. And he did the same exact thing, except it was only 35 units plus commercial on there. And we denied both of those applications because we deemed both the applications as incomplete, which is really, really important to understand. And since then, since we deemed those applications incomplete, he has further sued us and to get us to force us to accept those applications. Now, this supposed developer has never developed anything. He buys land and he flips it. He's very malicious in the way he does it. He's very litigious, I should say. And I'll just end off with saying that throughout all of this, all the judges have said that we are correct in doing what we're doing, in denying the application, but they've come to their opinions in different routes in different ways. And because of that, we in Redondo Beach now have a charter amendment on the November 5th election called Measure RB, which amends our city charter in order to comply with, one, the state housing HCD housing element that's certified by the Housing Community Development Agency. And then two is the 2, 3, 4, 5, many various wins in the court system that we have had, and it rectifies all the opinions, puts it all together. And number 3 is our own city charter. So it cleans all of that up. And so these are costs that are not talked about at the state level when it comes to running a city. And it's extremely expensive to run a city, and we're in a defensive mode, but we've been winning. But it's a high stakes game here in Redondo Beach.
Okay.
Thanks, Neil. Joan, let me take for a moment here and say that we have a wealth of knowledge here in our speakers who are either elected officials, former city council members, and in most cases came to that from planning commission positions. So many people here who understand the whole planning ins and outs. And so I'd like to move on and give Mike Griffiths about 8 or 9 minutes. Our plan will be to have each of these folks tell you a little about themselves and about what are the issues in their cities. And then we will open it up for questions.
Thank you,
So,
Anita, and thank you.
Mike,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Joan, for putting this together and inviting me to speak a little bit on this really important topic that unfortunately not enough people in the community understand what's been happening here the last few years. I'm recently retired from the Torrance City Council after serving 10 years on the council, and previous to that I was on the Torrance Planning Commission. It was termed out in April, so I'm fully retired now, but I've started another organization I'll touch on in just a minute. So several years ago, as a council member, we were going through routine modifications to some of our ordinances, and I noticed something happening, and that was that we were modifying our building and zoning codes in a way that our public didn't want. And it really got me concerned, because we're not the state legislators. We're worried about what's going on in our local community in Torrance, in my case. And to find out that all of a sudden the state has been passing these bills that are basically taking our ability as a city, which has been granted to us, a privilege that's granted to us by the state constitution, where we as cities are supposed to be able to manage our own land use and zoning. And so several years ago, starting around 2016, 2017, is when I noticed that things are starting to change in ways that we didn't want. And yet we couldn't say no to them, because these were passed by state legislators and signed by the governor over the years. And the first bills that passed that we noticed was the bills allowing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in our communities. And in Torrance, we did not allow ADUs previously, unless you were zoned for multiple units. So if you were zoned in an R1, which is a residential single unit zone, historically, you were not allowed to build a secondary or a third unit, and you weren't even allowed to legally convert your garage to a living space. But in 2016, 2017, the state started passing bills that said, oh, you know what? We don't care what R1 zoning means anymore. We now say that you can build ADUs on R1 zone properties and build small units either within or in addition to the existing single family homes that are on the R1 zone properties. And we as the council were scratching our heads saying, why are we allowing this to happen? This is not something that we want, and this is not something that our residents want. And so it turns out, as staff explained to us, is that these were bills that were passed by the state. And over the years, the state has been passing hundreds of bills that have been slowly taking away cities' rights to local control of their land use and zoning. And we believe it's contrary to the US or state constitution that gives, especially charter cities like Torrance, the right to manage their own land use and zoning. And so I was upset, as were many of my colleagues on the council, but yet we felt like there was nothing we could do about it. And as a single city, there really isn't anything we can do about it. There's nothing we can do to fight the state. And so I took it upon myself to take it up a notch. And I formed in 2020, I formed an organization called California Cities for Local Control. And the intent and purpose of that organization, with a bunch of volunteers that I recruited, and several of which are on this call today, Steve Peristem and Joan Davidson as well, we decided that we would go out and reach out to every single elected state official in cities, the local elected officials. So all 420 or however many cities there are now, we reached out and are continuing to reach out to all of the council members and mayors in all those cities to try to find out who else out there besides me and my colleagues in Torrance are upset with what's happening by the state bills that are taking away our ability to manage our own cities from a land use and zoning perspective. And so far, over the course of the last couple of years, with the help of my volunteers, we've identified and got over 700, almost 710 now, local elected officials who have signed on with us to say that they're not in support of what the state is doing, and that they believe that the state should leave local control to the local officials. And so we've been watching every year, more and more bills continue to pass, and we continue to try to fight them. But unfortunately, the state is on a mission to do this. They are supported very heavily financially by developers and other groups that support high density housing to be built. And we believe that this is a payback to developers who helped get state officials elected. And basically they're opening up our cities to development where we don't necessarily want it, through a combination of many different bills and a modification of a complicated process called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, you may have heard. And that's something where the state says, this is how many houses we expect each city to build or to allow to be built. And that process has gone just skyrocketed out of control. In Torrance, every 8 years, they assign us a new goal of housing that we're expected to meet. Our previous goal that ended in 2021 was 1,450 units. Torrance only built less than 100 units of those 1,450 that we were asked to build. And you know what? That was okay. And we never met our goals in the past. And everybody was fine with that. And Torrance is a built out city. We don't have a lot of free space to build. And so that's been our city's mantra for a long time, is that we just don't want to be a high density city, and we're happy with the way we are. And we're going to allow some limited building, but we don't want to go crazy. And so what the state did is they upped the numbers for all cities to ridiculous numbers. And now the current number in Torrance is 5,000 new units between now and 2029. And the scary thing about that is that we are no longer allowed to miss that target. If we miss that target, the state's going to penalize cities who don't reach their targets and basically open up our cities to development without any review by the public or the planning commissions or city councils. And building will just absolutely go crazy. That's called what Nils referred to as builder's remedy. And it allows developers to come in and take over our cities. And the city councils will have no say in the matter. And this is just a horrible situation that every year, just this year alone, in 2024, 32 new housing bills that impact our local control of housing and land use and zoning were passed and signed by the governor just this last week. And it's just insane what's been going on. We can touch on a lot of the details as we go on, but I want to let the others have a chance to speak. But we continue to fight, even though it's been a huge uphill battle. We do believe as some of these projects start coming to fruition, the public is going to increasingly become upset. And I think there will be a public revolt at some point in time. And I want to be at the right place at the right time to help move that revolt along. Thank you.
Thank
Mike,
you, Mike.
you wait a second. Mike has a website. Mike, you want to just mention?
Oh, sure.
that?
Yeah. If anybody's interested, again, we're focused on local elected officials. So we aren't looking to get individual people signed up on our site, but you're welcome to read what we do and see who's all signed up with us. The website for California Cities for Local Control, that's the name of my organization, is called Local Control CA, all one word, localcontrolca.com. And you're all
Thanks,
welcome
Mike.
to take a look at that and check out all the cities that have joined with us and even passed resolutions in support of protecting local control.
Thank you, Mike. And I think for those of you who are not elected officials who are on this call, one thing that's a theme you'll hear tonight is that there are elected officials, many elected officials, who know that what Sacramento is doing is wrong, is bad, and is counterproductive. The question is, what will it take to wake people up? And I know that many of you are here tonight because you've already been awakened by what's going on. But what we ask ourselves as elected officials or former elected officials who are still in this fight is, how much pain will it take? And it's something I'd like you to think about, because it's something we'd like you guys to talk about when we finished with our presenters, is what will it take to wake up the rest of the folks as to the damage that's going on? So let me go next. I think David is not with us, correct, Joan?
I don't see David. Steve, did you get an answer from him?
So let me
Steve
go on.
Harrison? No? Okay.
I
Let
did
me go-
not receive anything back from David.
Okay, then let me go on to Steve Zuckerman, and you'll please unmute yourself to the extent you can talk, and if you don't want to go for 10 minutes, it's okay. Steve Zuckerman, go ahead. Let's see.
Steve,
Okay.
yeah,
There you go.
I think that's it. Yeah, I actually, Mike pretty well laid it out in terms of what my experience has been. The difference is, and the two city council people who have spoken just now are in charter cities. And I really don't know how much more rights a charter city has with respect to all of this. But I know that our city, to be honest, Rolling Hills Estates, I was a council person there for a long time, couple decades plus, and just stepped down. And one of the reasons I stepped down was this housing situation. It's kind of like, well, what's the point? I mean, our most important mandate is to try to preserve and improve our local environment. And all of these laws have made that very, very difficult. But I'll be frank, our staff has kind of thrown their hands up and saying, well, we can't fight the state. It's no longer can't fight City Hall. It's can't fight the state legislature. We're not a charter city. I don't know how much difference that really makes, but it's very, very, very depressing. And what's more depressing to me, in a way, is not just that our staff has kind of, and my colleagues, they did all the right things early on, but they saw things were just, the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. And it just wore everybody out, and we were getting nowhere. And I think Mike is right. If this is going to change, it really has to change from the bottom up, from people complaining, both to their city councils and especially to their elected representatives. But I'm a little bit pessimistic about that. My feeling is people really aren't going to complain until something happens right on their block. Then they'll start complaining. Now, maybe a few large projects will change that. For example, in my city, there's a project going up on Deep Valley Road, which is very big, very oversized, and really poorly designed. And it could be that may start making people aware of what's happening. But it's kind of sad that a lot of bad things are going to have to happen before any good things do.
I think you're right, and just to add to your or answer your question about the difference in the rights between charter cities and what are called general law cities, this is being litigated right now in the context of housing law, because charter cities are supposed to have full rights, as Mike Griffiths laid out just a moment ago, full rights to determine their own land use and zoning, whereas general law cities agree pretty much to just go along with whatever the state sets out. There is a concept in the Constitution that cities have home rule rights, but charter cities have special or additional rights. However, the state has challenged that in court.
Largely.
And Mr. Bosler, would you mute yourself, please? The state has challenged that in court. It's part of the argument going on a couple of lawsuits, and the state has very deliberately tried to throttle back the rights of charter cities and other cities by most recently passing legislation that says that cities can no longer self-certify their housing elements, which Councilmember Nierenheim talked about, how they self-certified and then it went to the state, and in between when the city self-certified and the state agreed, they had these proposed projects that they're now having to litigate over. Well, the state said we didn't like losing that round of legal battle, And so they've now come in with legislation that says you can't self-certify. So even when there are battles fought, whether they are charter cities under the Constitution or other cities, general law cities trying to do things, whenever there is a win in the courts, the legislature is coming behind and trying to change the law to head off the assertion of those rights. So it's a really sad situation. Let me go on now. Thank you, Steve, to Derek Lazaro. And Derek, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you. Nice to meet many of the folks here. I'm Derek Lazaro. I've served 8 years on the Planning Commission in Palos Verdes Estates. I was chair of the Planning Commission for 2 years. I'm currently running for City Council in Palos Verdes Estates. And, PVE is a little bit of a unique city in that we have virtually no commercial zones. We just have a couple of very small commercial plazas. And something like 95% of the city is R1 single family residential homes. And as you might imagine, the residents there have very strong opinions about keeping it that way. One of the other things that is somewhat unique about PVE, but I think that there is potentially some ability to apply this to other cities, is there's a citywide HOA that covers the entire city and has since the 1920s. And the HOA concept, I think, is interesting. Because many of the state's laws, not all of them, but many of the laws we've heard others talking about, do have carve-outs or sort of dance around the concept of deed restrictions or HOAs. And I don't pretend to be an expert on HOA law, but I know that the state has been a little bit reluctant to push that issue. And I think, we've talked a little bit about sort of waking people up and arousing folks who might be upset and be willing to become engaged in this issue. And I think if people who lived in HOA communities within other cities, whether that's Redondo or Torrance or whatever, if they felt that the communities that they were trying to build within their HOAs were going to be fundamentally altered, I imagine that they would be quite upset by that as well. So I think that's an interesting angle. And again, the state, from what I've seen from my vantage point, has been somewhat reluctant. I think there was one bill, AB 670, that was passed quite a few years ago that did sort of directly attack HOAs. But since that, they've been a little bit, again, a little reluctant in Sacramento to take on HOAs directly. I know HOAs have mixed, people don't love HOAs. They have their downsides. But I thought I would just sort of throw that out there as something I've heard talked about. Other strategies or other key factors that other communities have factored into resisting overdevelopment include water limitations. I know that in Los Osos, which is a city in Central California, they claim that they don't have any water. And as a result, the state has exempted them from new construction requirements. And I think, in fact, you really can't even build an ADU in Los Osos. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know all the details of how they navigated that, but that is the current reality in that community. I know that, again, in Palos Verdes, fire safety is a factor that a lot of residents talk about, and I think correctly so. We've seen, huge weed overgrowths and bramble and bushes growing in the city in parklands. And, I think that most of the people that live in PV feel that the parklands are a huge part of what makes it so special. It's a shared resource that people use for hiking and recreation. Really part of the overall beauty and draw of the area. But it's also a fire hazard. And as you add more and more density, escape routes are harder. You're pushing sort of deeper and deeper, up against, every crevice of space. And I think that that's a factor as well, that again, the state seems to largely not care. I mean, they really don't seem to care when you bring these issues up. Something that I'd maybe like to kind of end with is the state bases a lot of these new laws on data or studies that they claim that either universities or others have put together that show that if you just build more housing, you'll reduce the cost of housing, and that will help everyone collectively in the state. But what these studies generally do not address are other important factors like psychological health. Is it healthy for people to be crammed in, right? I mean, does density necessarily equal, psychological health for families? They don't address things like open space and the value of open space, the ecology of open space, the environmental benefits of wetlands, or all these sorts of things that once they're gone, right? I mean, I remember growing up in the Los Angeles area, and there were the Bologna wetlands out in the Playa Vista area, and half of those were bulldozed and turned into homes, right? And again, once it's gone, it's gone. So I think that something that we could potentially do to move the needle, and I'm aware of Mike Griffith's group, and I've actually attended one or two of their meetings as a guest. But I think that if we could build our own data sets. And again, I think psychologists could be involved, child development specialists, environmentalists. I think there's a narrative that we could start to put together that, it's critical, of course, to have the voice of people saying, hey, I don't want this in my neighborhood. But if we could add to that voice, there's some real downsides here, right? We're going to use up all the water. We're going to, kill off all the open space. Maybe that's not so good for the kids. I think that would start to shift the narrative as well. So I'd encourage everyone listening, if you are so inclined, maybe contribute to those efforts as well.
Thank you very much. A couple of data points for you, just for your own information. And I think this is a useful data point for everybody who gets into a discussion about how much housing do we need in California. The current RHNA cycle calls for 2.5 million houses. 2.5 million houses over 8 years. That simple math comes down to kind of sort of a little over 300,000 houses per year. In the state of California, in the last 50 years, there's been exactly 1 year where we built at least or greater than 300,000 housing units in a single year. The average in the last 20 years has been much closer to about 100,000 units. So the targets that were set for cities were at least 3 times greater than what California has been able to build, at least since the 2008 downturn. And in part, that is because the loss of people who do the construction bailed out of California or bailed out of the industry in 2008. And we still do not have as many tradespeople available to build houses today in California as we had in 2007. So it's really not about the numbers. It's really about cities failing so that the state can take over zoning and development and reward their friends. thank you so much and best of luck with your election. I'd
Thank
like to go now to Steve Pearstam. Steve, you'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
All right, thank you. My name's Steve Pearstam. I just rolled off 4 terms as a planning commissioner in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes, and I'm currently running for a seat on city council. I'd like to cover 2 topics. One is a brief status of where our city is right now in terms of how we're dealing with some projects. We've had our wake-up call. We've had 2 builders remedy projects that were introduced to our city in January and March of this year, right before we had an accepted, approved housing element. So we have two live active projects going on before us now. I'll speak to the first one. There was one that came in March, right before the housing element was accepted, and that was about a 11-story, 75 to 90 units on one tower on a little over an acre piece of ground on a steep slope. Now, that's horrible, and as you can imagine, it's out of character with our Palos Verdes East Side neighborhood, to the extent where most of the houses over there are anywhere. A smaller lot is a quarter acre. Larger ones are either half or a whole acre. So that was met with a lot of opposition, the organization in the immediate area. And the good news there is that we're right now in the last probably 7 days to the next 7 days. There were 4 different similar but different projects that were introduced for that site, and they're all rolling through that 6-month, 180-day time frame where if there's no follow-up to the project, no final details, final project plan, then the project no longer can be under the builder's remedy. And so we're pretty close there. And there hasn't been any communication back to the city regarding changes or adjustments or expectations from, at least this goes back up to last week. So hopefully that'll take care of itself. The other project that's certainly got everyone's attention in our city is called the Silver Spur area. And in that case, we have 4 towers, 11 stories high on 5 or 6 acres in a canyon. And so that one has had a little different life. It came to pass introduced in January. So we had a mid-July 6-month date. In the course of doing that, we had an approved housing element in middle of April. And somewhat after that point in time, the developers came back and modified the project significantly. They crossed the threshold of change. So, and they withdrew, they committed, they said that they were withdrawing their original project and they're reintroducing one that's different. So that took them, in the interpretation of the city, that took them out of the builder's remedy laws and protections that were granted there. So in response to that, this new project that they introduced after we had an approved housing plan, they have a project right now that has to go through all the protections of our normal development code. Of course, in this case, the builder was not happy with that process that occurred up to that point in time, and has since appealed to our community development director, who has said, no, we're going to abide by the law, and that you have to revert back to the full development process and the protections of our code. The next step is they have appealed that decision, and they're going to go before our planning commission on October 8th. So at that point, I've just described process and history. I'll stop at that point and we'll see what happens in the next steps. You can use your imagination, which the next steps are going to be, but stand by for October 8th. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're gonna
No,
comment.
go ahead.
Okay, now I wanted to do it just something a little different, and instead of and with that update, give a little bit of a crystal ball through some personal experience I've had. I'm educated as a land use planner. My first professional job was as a county planner back in Pennsylvania. At that time, the state of Pennsylvania passed some legislation to address affordable housing. What they did a little differently, though, is they didn't do it by income. They did it by different types of housing. So you'd have different type of densities, you'd have twins, you'd have apartment complexes. And so you'd have this array of housing types which would hopefully accommodate different income groups as well. But they went the housing route. So unfortunately in Pennsylvania, we think we have a lot of municipalities. They have anywhere from 50 to 100 municipalities of different types in every county, and there's 67 counties. So it's really hard for an individual community, which some are very, very small, to have this accommodation and built out little boroughs. And they did the same thing as our legislature's done. You can't get with your neighboring communities and come up with some kind of a regional plan where there's an accommodation for these different housing groups. So it's been a real struggle over the years with this. That was professionally what I was dealing with. So almost a year ago, I'm in a conversation with a friend of mine who worked for the Philadelphia Regional Housing Authority. This was his job, an attorney, and he was very much pro-housing for Philly and the surrounding areas. So I'm telling him about our state laws. And he's listening, and I'm going on and on and on the last couple of years. And he says, and I quote, "That's nuts." And I go, "I know." So then he reminds me of this legislation back from the 60s or 70s we were wrestling with at the time in the late 70s when I was planning there. And he said, "How has that worked out for you? This is a moment where I can actually look into the future and say, is it worth all this effort? And did you address the concern of affordable housing?" And his response was very interesting and very simple. He told me, he said, "You're going to build a lot of market rate housing." And that was it. And then since that time, I've thought about this, applied what we're going through, and he's absolutely right. And the experience in Pennsylvania is absolutely right. We're going to build a lot of market rate housing, and we're going to fail on providing affordable housing to our citizens. Thanks.
Absolutely. And for those of you who
Could
are
Craig
looking
Quinn
for
speak next
a-
as part of before, because everyone's had a chance before
Sure.
Neil
hang-
is going
hang
to
on a
speak,
sec,
but
Joan.
just to the financial.
We're gonna take that in just a minute. I want to
Whoops.
make one comment to what Steve just said. And this also all goes back to something Derek said. If any of you want to dig into some of the financial issues on an international basis, I commend to you an Australian economist by the name of Cameron Murray. And he writes and does podcasts. I've heard him speak. He's been in the United States. He's worked with Vancouver. He's worked with other cities in Australia, and he has fantastic information and data on why building more and building more density makes things worse, not better. So with that, I know that Quinn was going to talk a little bit about financial stuff. You'll have to unmute yourself.
It's not working.
I'm sorry, while we're waiting, this is Steve X. How do we spell the Australian that you just mentioned?
Cameron, C-A-M,
Okay, I know that.
Cameron Murray,
Murray.
M-U-R-R-A-Y.
A-Y.
And I
Okay.
will verify that and get that to you together with a link to his podcasts.
Okay, thank you.
It's a little dense reading for somebody who only took 2 semesters of econ in college about 40 years ago, but good stuff.
Okay.
Well,
So
good
Quinn,
evening. My name's Craig Quinn. I am currently running for City Council in Palos Verdes Estates. My background is primarily in healthcare financing and not in real estate per se, other than some private venture that we're involved in. But from a financial perspective, I think everyone on this call would agree that the unfunded mandates that are coming down from Sacramento are choking our city's budgets significantly. I am not on the city council today, so I can't speak to every bit of our budget, but in looking at what we're facing moving forward, it's unsustainable from my perspective. I think it's important for all of us to come together as you all have, and figure out a way to tackle this as a larger group rather than independent, smaller cities from that standpoint. I don't really have much more to offer than that at this point in time from a financial perspective, other than it's a huge budgetary issue.
Craig, I just was going to ask you about I guess the state started this whole issue with high density housing to build affordable housing. But Palos Verdes, and none of the Palos Verdes cities are really affordable. So I know that in our community, they're looking at using a lot of Lanada Bay. And I don't see that being affordable, but what do you think?
Well, land is extremely expensive. The cost of construction has gone up significantly. And I think one of the reasons that they've passed, was it SB 450, is because they can't really come up with a business case for affordable housing. It's not working. And I think that's how the charter cities band together and won their lawsuit. They immediately turned around and said, okay, now it's about housing density and not necessarily affordable housing. But it doesn't pencil out. As many of you know, in order to pencil out projects in any city, projects are getting bigger and bigger in order to justify the cost to acquire the land, do all the planning, et cetera, and the construction costs to turn a profit on any building or any project that they're involved in.
Thank you so much, Mr. Quinn. We have an offer from Nils to speak briefly about the lawsuit, and then Mr. Zug-Smith has his hand raised. Nils, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a great question that was brought up. SB 9 is a state law that was passed a few years ago. What it does is basically make single family homes in the state of California illegal. And it took away all single family homes and converted them to duplexes. So you could take any single family house or plot and split it in half, create 2 townhomes, and then also forced to put in accessory dwelling units or granny flats in there as well. The parking requirements were kept the same at 2. You couldn't require more parking. And this was supposed to solve the housing issue in Redondo in the statewide, and because density equates affordability. Well, we've continuously seen that it does the opposite. It brings up the price of housing. City of Redondo Beach, along with City of Torrance, thank you, Mike Griffiths, for voting on that, and City of Whittier and the City of Carson, and then City of Del Mar jumped in a little bit later. We all sued the state of California on the state law. The law firm of Alshire and Winder actually were the ones to private law firm to actually go for, who represents Whittier and Carson. They were the ones that actually really write the briefs and write the arguments and move forward. Well, we won that, and we won that as charter cities. So us 5 charter cities, and just so everyone knows, there's 2 types of cities in California. There's a charter city, which has our own city constitution, and we're separate from the state. And then there's general law cities, which the vast majority of cities are in California, which are basically direct children of the state of California, and the state of California can basically tell them what they can and cannot do. It sets a majority of the rules. After winning the SB 9 lawsuit on a couple of points, the 2 major points was affordability. There is no mention of real affordability in the state law, meaning there was no requirement that the second units or third or fourth units in that splitting up of the plot of land were required to be affordable or highly affordable. They could all be market rate housing. And there was no definition of affordability in there and how it directly related to charter cities. And we actually proved and showed that what was happening in charter cities and cities statewide, you had no affordability happening from SB 9 and in the cities that it was taking place at. So we sued. We ended up winning. It took a long time. It was a really big win. Everyone kind of put up their hands, says yes, 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 congratulations. The problem is, I said right away was, well, the state can just come through in the next legislative session next year, pass a state bill to fix the problems that we uncovered. Well, little did I know, the state of California had this new Senate bill, SB 450, waiting in the wings. Last year, it got all of its votes, and all it needed was one more vote on the floor of the Senate, and then go back over to the Assembly and get a vote as well. And last year, 2023, they shelved it. They put it on ice, put it in a closet, and they didn't talk about it anymore. Well, when we won in May, June, the state appealed it right away, and then they went silent. And I can just tell you from behind the scenes, we all kind of started scratching our heads going, something's weird. And then we found SB 450. So some of you might remember I was asking around, hey, does anyone hear about SB 450, this state bill that's kind of waiting in the wings? Is everyone talking about it? Out of absolutely nowhere, came out on Tuesday or Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, it already had a Senate floor vote, and then it had an Assembly vote, and it had something else the following week on Monday or Tuesday, and it was passed. And the governor said, I'm going to sign this. What did that do? It basically corrected a lot of the issues that we uncovered, and the judge says, yes, you are correct. So what is this going to do? It's going to force us to go back down the trial court, down to the judge, and re-argue essentially our case on this. Now, a lot of people would say this only affects, your win only affects those 5 cities I mentioned. It is true at the trial court level, it only affects us 5 cities. But since it was under appeal, once it went through the appeal process and we would win at the appeal process, it would affect all charter cities statewide. Again, the state is very smart. As Assemblymember Al Merciti said back in our Neighborhood Voices meeting for all the coastal electeds, he said, you guys are fighting the most well-funded lobbyist organization, the most well-run lobbyist organization, and the most powerful lobbyist organization, and that is the real estate organization, lobbyist organization. So they're very smart up there. They got a lot of people getting paid a lot of money, and we're just trying to go through. And the only answer to all of this that you guys are saying is our Neighborhood Voices. It takes all the power away from the state legislature, stops the centralized planning, and returns all control back to the local level. So that's the update on SB 9.
Thanks, Nils. And now I promised Mr. Zugsmith. So if you'll unmute.
Thank you. Some years ago, Lois was asked by a member or 2 members of our city council, RPV, to look into changing our city from a general law city to a charter city. So Lois put together a extensive committee. There were 5 attorneys on it. We met several times, drafted several documents, and brought the matter to a place where it was ready to go back to the city council. By the time we got back to the city council, there was another city attorney, coincidentally from the same law firm that the previous city attorney was from, who thought that changing to a charter city would provide us more protection. And I was wondering if Mike thought that because they have a charter city, if the institution of a lawsuit would at least get us onto a place where we had a voice. And since a charter city apparently has more independence, perhaps it would be a good party in standing to bring the litigation.
Thank you. Let me toss it to Mike to give you a good answer. Mike, this is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Zugsmith. Thank you for your question. I highly recommend cities that are general law cities to seriously consider becoming charter cities. The charter cities do have a lot more protections. It's spelled out in the state constitution. And it's our feeling, and this was the basis of the SB9 lawsuit for charter cities that Nils just talked about, that Torrance and Redondo and several other cities participated in, is that we believe that the state is bypassing the state constitution, and we believe many of their actions are in fact unconstitutional in regards to charter cities who have special protections in the Constitution. And so that's one of the things that I was going to talk about here as a kind of a wrap-up discussion is that what can we do to stop this? And so one of the methods is to take legal action like we did in the case of SB9. It's expensive, it takes time, and it takes dedication from city electeds to step up and get their cities involved. California Cities for Local Control worked very hard to get multiple cities to join in this lawsuit, and we're prepared to continue to do that effort to get additional cities to join in additional lawsuits against some of these bad bills. But this is going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of volunteer time to convince cities to join with us. But absolutely, I highly recommend cities consider becoming charter cities. It gives you a lot more independence as a city, not just in land use and zoning, but in many, many other ways when your elections, and just how you run your city with your public safety and so forth. So it's a wise thing to do. It takes a little bit of time and effort for a city to do it. It requires a vote of the people. It requires time on staff to put together their charter, and so it's not a simple process, but it's one that I do recommend, and there are many resources out there available to help cities to do that. And in fact, the lead attorney on the SB9 lawsuit is also very, very competent in helping cities become charter cities. But the other things that people can do is obviously our group, California Cities for Local Control, needs more volunteers to help reach out to these city electeds to get them to join in the fight. They can't sit on the sidelines and let this continue without doing something. We need cities to unite. Otherwise, there's not a chance that we will win against the state. If we all try to do this as individual cities, we will fail. But if we unite, we can fight. If we go after legal opportunities, which we believe there are many, we can make some effort. But there's another thing that's really important, and I know that Anita will talk about because she's heavily involved in it, is there's a ballot initiative that was started many years ago by former Redondo Mayor Bill Brand, called Our Neighborhood Voices, which will change the state constitution to tremendously protect cities for their ability to manage their own land use and zoning. And that, if we're successful in passing a ballot initiative like the Our Neighborhood Voices ballot initiative, we will be able to take back what the state has been taking away from us. And it's such an important thing to do, but it's going to take a huge amount of effort to get it onto the ballot. And then once it gets on the ballot, to get it passed by all the voters in the state of California, because there will be tremendous opposition from the heavily financed developers and real estate world. And so it's going to take a lot of effort from the people to make that work. But we strongly support the effort of the Our Neighborhood Voices people, and I'll let Anita take it from there.
Sure.
Well,
So I'll just speak.
I
I'm
may,
sorry.
just a couple of thoughts. One, we had in that committee all of the information and the documents prepared that were necessary to convert the city to a charter city. But by the time we got back to the city council with the next city attorney, he didn't think that the value of changing to a charter city would be worth the effort. So it never
Fire
went
your city
further.
attorney.
What's that?
Fire your
one.
city attorney.
Well, they had two out of the same firm. But in any event, the other thing that I thought I'd mention is that there is a set of rules in California called private attorney general. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but if a attorney in private practice takes on a case which benefits the public good, the state or the government can become responsible for that attorney's fees. So that's happened up here in another case in the not too distant past. So
Mr.
there's
Doug
that.
Smith, I'd like to move on and speak to that, and also what Mike Griffith said, and we do have a couple of other hands raised. So
Okay.
you raise a valid point. Here is why our Neighborhood Voices was formed. It's too hard, in our view, to battle the bad laws. There are more than 200 laws that have been passed that affect zoning, development, and housing. SB 9 was one. It takes too much. It's not to say we shouldn't try, but the amount of effort and time and the unwillingness of most cities to commit taxpayer dollars to fighting Sacramento is very, very difficult. Mike and Nils and the other cities that have been involved in these have done Herculean effort to make it happen. It's really, really tough. Even many of the people, because I'm one of the people who signed up for CCLC, for Mike's organization, when I was on the city council and mayor in the city of Los Altos, and yet I'm a minority on our council. It was a 3-2 vote to support all the build, and I was in the minority, and that's true for a lot of cities. And unfortunately, the power and the money is, as Mike said and Neil said, is on the other side. So here's what the option is, okay? You can't fight all the bills. You can't fight them in court. You can't fight them when they're going through the legislature. We have people who say, oh, we're going to change our legislators. No, the system is stacked against you for trying to change the power structure in Sacramento. The only way you can stop this, the only way you can take away the excuse in many cities, and this is happening in some cities, where, as Mr. Zooksmith said, you've got a city attorney who persuaded the council, oh, gee, there's really not a benefit, don't go down that road. Where the people can have the power to make it happen is through the California constitutional amendment process. So Our Neighborhood Voices constitutional amendment is very simple. It says, once it's passed, if there's a conflict between the local zoning and development law and the state law, doesn't matter what the law is, which one it is, 9, 10, 20, 35, 330, name any of them ones you want. Your city council will be able to write whatever code you want them to write. If it conflicts with state law of any sort, if it's about land use and zoning, the local law prevails. You don't want ADUs in your town, you don't have ADUs. You don't want ADUs in the front yard, you don't have ADUs in the front yard. You don't want ADUs that can be 2 stories. You don't have to have ADUs that can be 2 stories. That's just 3 examples of laws that have been passed by the legislature that cities could immediately go in and change their zoning code to what the people want. And they can't get away with saying, our hands are tied, Sacramento makes us do that, because their hands won't be tied anymore. They will be accountable to you, the people, to do the right thing. I'm pleased to have support from Joan Davidson, from Nils Narenheim, who's on here, from Mike Griffiths, and a lot of other people. And I recognize names of some of the people on this call who are already on our mailing list. We are striving to get enough people combined with enough money to collect over 1 million signatures. We would like to get about half of them with volunteers. Half of them we know we will have to get with paid signature gatherers to get this on the ballot. The earliest we can, practically speaking, do that is for 2026. I go back to the question we raised at the very beginning of this conversation. How much pain does there have to be before people will say, enough? Step forward, as Joan has stepped forward, Steve has stepped forward, Mike stepped forward, Nils, so many people have stepped forward and said, we will join you. You can go on ourneighborhoodvoices.com. Mike Griffiths just kindly put the link in the chat, and you can sign up to be on our mailing list. And you can also please donate. We run with an entirely volunteer board, but we need the money to make this happen. Derek's had his hand up for a long time, so I'm going to give him the floor. And then I think, Nils, did you want to close with something too?
Well, thank you. And actually, I was just going to ask what we could do to help with the initiative. I was also going to ask essentially how far along it was. I mean, you've largely answered both questions. Is there any sort of polling or other information
Yes.
that gives us a sense that it is generally supported?
Yes, we did polling when the RHNA process was active in Southern California, but hadn't really hit Northern California. So it's about 3 years ago. And we already polled over 60%, and we only need 50% plus one. So even before Northern California was activated, we were polling over 60% in every demographic, including renters, including people in the 20 to 30-year-old range. So the only place we didn't poll over 60% was Scott Wiener's district in San Francisco.
Sounds about right.
Thank you. We promised we were going to go about an hour. Do we have other questions from the wonderful people who've been here to listen tonight? Anybody else want to ask something? Gene Davis, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Across the street, my neighbor is putting in an SB9 duplex. He's also putting in an ADU. He moved away from the house 3 years ago. The lot is being converted into a small rental complex, pretty much sidestepping the anti-speculation concerns inside an SB9. The lot is not that large, 7,400 square feet. House is the residence is a 3-bedroom, 1,600 square foot house. But here's the rub. ADUs don't really require any parking as long as there's a bus stop of any sort close by. ADUs also sidestep any CC&R restrictions. SB9 requirement for public transportation was beefed up to high quality. If high quality transportation is not available, the state gave the local jurisdiction the authority to require off-street parking. So this small lot has a duplex going in, and to meet the parking requirement, a garage is being constructed in the driveway. Since the ADU is going in, the original garage is being converted. So the question revolves around the city planning, currently approving plans in Rancho Palos Verdes for this rental complex, saying that it's okay to build the garage in the driveway. Now, the city code, RPV code, was clarified back in 22. That was a memo to the Planning Commission from the then person in charge of planning department. And that clarification said that the off-street parking would be in addition to all existing parking. Here's the rub. The city's current interpretation means that just about any lot in Rancho Palos Verdes Estates, you name it, can have a duplex SB9 in the backyard. I'm not saying an SB 9 can't be constructed. The thing I'm saying is that a single SB 9 with parking should be constructed. And that a duplex is too large for the parcel. So Rancho Palos Verdes is one of the few cities that I found that has a clarification of what off-street parking means. In existing, that the off-street parking must be in addition to existing. I haven't been able to find that clarification with any other city.
Mr. Quinn, do you know something about this? Did you dial in here? Because you've asked a very specific question and about off-street parking. And I don't know of any city that has the specific language you're talking about, but I know there are cities that have language that define off-street parking. Many, many cities have language that defines what and how on off-street parking. And just because you may not be aware, although you're obviously very well informed on SB 9, you may think of that as a small lot to be putting 2 or 3 or 4 units on. But as far as the definition in SB 9, the lot can be as small as 1,200 square feet. And still be a legal lot.
I agree. Totally agree. Lot splits usually use that square footage as the definition of the smallest parcel. The thing I'm looking at is that the only way an SB 9 can be built on this lot is a single unit. A duplex is too large because it encroaches on existing parking with the off-street parking requirement the state has allowed.
That's something you're gonna have to take up with your city attorney, because I don't know, unless there's someone here who can answer this and is really familiar with the law, I don't think that we can address the specific city code on parking, given, and I know there's language in SB 9 where cities can't deny them. So Joan, do you know if there's anybody on the call?
Steve Peristom, do you want to speak to this?
No, I think Steve had to, oh yeah, Steve, go ahead.
I'm right here. You know, I'd have to see more information about the actual project that's coming before, that came to the desk on the planning department to comment on this, so I don't want to comment on this. We didn't see it in the planning commission, but that is a ministerial approval. So I'm a little confused with the relationship between the SB 9 law and the ADU part of that, because there is some differences there, and there are different requirements as well. So I would I don't want to comment on that without a better and closer understanding.
Yeah,
Maybe we
you're
could
gonna have to.
talk
Mike
offline.
Griffiths, did you want to say something?
Yes, my question is more to alert you to the off-street parking loophole that the city attorney has beat me up with twice now.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take
Every
that.
time I mention it.
We'll
I
take
just wanted to
that.
add a couple of
And the city attorney goes, here's the reason we're gonna allow the garage to be built in violation of the existing parking. So we're still going back and forth, but it makes a big difference in what can happen on a lot.
Yes, agreed.
It's really complicated, and I want to just add a couple of really quick things on that. I thought SB 9 required one of the units to be owner occupied.
That's after the construction though, Mike. It doesn't require it. It requires
Okay.
the person who does the lot split to state that it is their intention to occupy
Right,
one
I
of the
knew there weren't any enforcement tools
There's no
provided in
enforcement
there.
tools. That's
Yeah,
correct.
I knew that was true. But then as
Yeah.
far as the ADUs go and the lot split and that's SB 9 may have provisions for parking on site versus off site, but there have been additional bills that are modified the ADU laws besides SB 9 that have eliminated the requirement for on-site parking. And so you have to, there's a lot of detail. You got to go and look at your planning department, your city attorney, and verify whether or not those other bills might have some impact on this particular case, because there's multiple factors in play here. You got the SB 9 for the lot split and the additional unit and additional ADUs that are allowed by SB 9, but then there's ADU laws themselves which apply to the ADUs, which are separate from SB 9, and those have impacts as well. And so it's very complicated, and it really requires an expert in the planning department who is very familiar with those laws to be able to give you a clear answer.
And unfortunately, the city's codes aren't always totally up to date in compliance with the many, many laws that have come out of Sacramento. It's just, that's the way it is. So, Elizabeth Spatz, pardon me. Go ahead and, can you unmute?
Yes, thank you. I've got a completely different question. I was really interested in Steve's description of the Pennsylvania kind of history coming forward and giving a little model of maybe what we're going to be looking at as far as disappointment in achieving the goals of the state. I'm curious to know from this group if you are aware of any example, any other state that has executed a plan like this to take over local development, and if so, what those evidences are in their success or failure. Or is the state of California, are they breaking new ground and just running amok with no model at all? They're just doing this because that's what they think they can do.
Yes and no.
Thank you.
Yes, they're running amok. Yes, they're running out ahead of most other states. Yes, there have been a couple of other similar experiments. Probably the one that had the most press was the actual city of Minneapolis, which is much smaller than most people realize. In fact, the cities represented on this call tonight in the aggregate have more people in them than the city of Minneapolis. But anyway, the city of Minneapolis did basically an SB 9 some years ago. They have declared it an utter failure, and they still haven't taken it off the books, but it's basically been a complete failure. And the city of Vancouver went for super density. And what has happened, it's one of the things that Cameron Murray does an excellent job of talking about, is that basically they've built, and the price per square foot of housing has gone up, not down, more than inflation in the last 15 years. So we're plowing new ground, going the wrong direction. So I'll just leave it at that unless one of my other colleagues wants to say something in response to your comment. Go ahead, Steve.
Great, thank you. Also, the state of Oregon no longer has single family zoning. And I've seen a couple cases there that they've built multifamily units out in cornfields to accommodate the law. They're just really misplaced housing structures. And I think they're going to recognize pretty soon, from what I've heard of the people that have been in those areas, they're having trouble filling those units. I'm sure they're mostly market rate. In fact, I know they're almost mostly market rate, but they're following the law, the opportunity that it provides for developers to follow the law.
Right. Yep. Nils, you were going to make a comment too a little while back.
Yeah, I was just going to say to that last question, they all these states copy each other, and they do not care about results. It doesn't matter about results. Nor do they care about your laws, your pesky little laws in your cities. No, they're just going to run right over them. They'll find any excuse, any reason, any legal loophole, and it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they'll just pass a state law that will supersede your general law or your charter city, and they'll mix it in between. Just so everyone knows, everyone always thinks that if you just get, we have a great representative, somebody, Al Marsucci. he fights for us. He talks about not doing all of these state bills, but he suffers because of it. But I'll tell you, 30%. Let me get the exact stats for you, because I always say 30%, but it's 30% of the assembly and 25% of the state senate in November 2022 was brand new. So what did they come out with in 2023 legislative session? SB 450, which they brought back. What they come out with this year, you know, it only gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. It's an exercise in futility to try to get the state on a we're going to create our own law and use that in this development. It's just not going to work. We can, you know, Mike Griffith said it perfectly as well. Anita said it. We can sue one of these 200 laws that have been created. There's 199 other ones, and it's just not going to end. An ADU can be sold now individually, parsed out as a separate lot, right? Keep that in mind. And if density is the answer, then why is Hong Kong, New York, San Francisco, London, the densest cities in the world, the most expensive to live in? So yeah, density equates to higher price points. But at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to solve any of this is our neighborhood voices, with taking this power and this control away from state legislature, which is just centralized government planning in Sacramento.
Run amok. I love that. We're going to keep that run amok thing.
Run amok. Yep. And return it back to your local city. You know, make no bones about it. The state legislators in the San Francisco Bay Area are extremely well organized, and they are running our state legislature, and everyone's falling in behind them. And if you're a Republican, you think it's a Democrat problem, guess what? The Republicans in the Valley, Central Valley, and other areas are voting along with it. And if you're a Democrat, think it's a Republican problem, nope, it's everyone's problem. These state laws are passing with 80-90% of the vote, well above the typical R&D numbers, 98% of the vote. I mean, sometimes it's 100%. So I'm just going to end off with saying our neighborhood voice is the only answer. I've been on city council for 7.5 years. I'm sick and tired of spending our money in Redondo Beach on fighting these state laws. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm here for our neighborhood voices, and that's it. That's the only answer.
Thank you, Nils. I think I'll turn this back to Joan. Did you want to make a final comment, Joan?
I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and being here tonight. I think the cities were well represented, and you can see everyone's fighting the same battle. And at the end of the day, Mike Griffiths created a great organization which says, okay, join us. And you and Nils are right in saying that this is the way to do it. We have to get this constitutional amendment. There's no other way. Huntington Beach has been spending millions of dollars to try to fight it. It doesn't work. So if I were you, I would just end this and ask everyone to get people to join our neighborhood voices, have fundraisers, continue the coffees and the outreach, because there's no other way to make headway unless we do this.
I'm going to give Amy, who hasn't spoken yet, and I know she knows a lot, so I'm going to give Amy the final word, and then we're going to say goodnight. Amy, go ahead.
I think you're calling, you just cut out, but I think you were calling on me. I'm not giving any information of my knowledge at all. My question is for people who have not been able to join tonight, anyone here, because it was recorded, can share this information with friends, neighbors, family who have not yet been turned on to what Mike is doing with CCLC, but even bigger than that is our neighborhood voices. Joan or Anita, can you tell people where they can go to get the recording of this so we can share it far and wide?
So what I'll do is I will get this into Joan and Mike and Nils' hands and Steve's as soon as I can get it pulled off my computer. I put it onto my computer because I was afraid it would get lost if I tried to upload it in the cloud dynamically during the meeting with my occasionally unstable internet connection. So hopefully I can drag it out of my hard drive and get it into a file that anybody can access, and I'll get the links to you guys, but it might be a couple of days before I can make that happen. So thank you.
I will just want to say something to Derek. Derek, you brought up all kinds of really logical, thoughtful, intelligent points as to what could be done, should be effective. Here's the problem. The state legislature doesn't give a damn about the logic. They are blatant in ignoring the will of the people. They have, of these 200 some odd laws, that are all about fixing the affordable housing crisis, which most people acknowledge does exist. The word affordable does not exist in any of those laws. Maybe in one or two, I think, we might want to do research on that. But essentially, they're so blatant, they don't even give a damn about trying to hide that it's about giving developers support and money and power. So unfortunately, all your points are so valid, and it's great talking points to people. But at the end of the day, none of it is working. They don't give a damn. They just go around us, and the Republicans are voting in lockstep with the Democrats. So anyone who yells at me that it's because it's a Democratic run state, it's all meaningless. None of them give a damn because they all benefit from developers' deep pockets. Our neighborhood voices is really the only answer, as has been said many times, and we'll have to keep saying it.
No, I agree. I'll just say the reason I brought up those data points, I agree 99% of the legislature doesn't care. But I do think it helps shift the narrative, right? If we're empowered with other information that we can share with, people who might sign up on the initiative or other things like that, and explain that it's not just about having enough housing, right? I mean, that's the narrative that the legislature is pushing as well. We're just trying to make housing affordable. There are other factors that we have to take into account. There's more forms of good out there than affordable housing. And so I think that was really the point I was trying to make. But I agree with you. They don't care, and we're not going to sway them.
Not
And
enough
the
water,
forces
there's
are
fire
too powerful.
hazards. They were trying to pass a bill this year that allowed
Let me
dense
get-
housing. They were trying
Whoa,
to take
whoa,
away the
guys.
fire zone.
Okay,
I'll
before we
stop now.
go,
Thank you, guys.
we can do a continuation. Joan will be happy to schedule another one. Thank you all very, very much for coming. Good night, Joan. Good
Thank
night
you.
to our panelists and all of you who spent time of your precious time. Good night.
Whenever you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Davis wants to ask